Hello and welcome to another episode of Chuchu is a Ranker. On today's episode we're going to be talking about Feeder. Now Feeder are a grunge pop band that blossomed in the late Britpop era and basically in the late 90s. Purveyors of power pop and grunge during their early career, Feeder changed musical styles after their drummer John Lee committed suicide shortly after their third album, and they became a more miserablist band. That actually allowed them to fit in with the zeitgeist at the time, along with bands like Travis and Coldplay, and for a brief time Feeder became one of the biggest bands in the UK. Since then the band's popularity has unfortunately waned and they're now back to being a cult act, but they do have a hardcore following that keeps the band just about alive. So without further ado, let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. These are Feeder's studio albums ranked from worst to best. So coming in last place, dead last, we have Renegades. Now Renegades was Feeder's 7th album, and it was the one where they tried to break away from the mainstream kind of miserablist Coldplay-esque music that they had been releasing and tried to reconnect with some of the energy and youthfulness of their earlier work. Unfortunately, youthfulness is quite a tricky thing to reconnect with when you're old, basically, and here they just fall flat on their faces, unfortunately. Even though the pace has definitely been upped, the band here just sound tired and old, like old men pretending to be young boys, you know, kind of like that Steve Buscemi meme, where he's got the skateboard and saying hello to his fellow schoolmates when he's like, 52 or something. Indicative of the failure of the whole project is the best song on the record is actually Down to the River, which is exactly what they were trying to get away from. That is a kind of mainstream miserablist piece of pop music. All of the faster paced stuff it just doesn't quite work. It's like the whole record sounds like filler. How can I explain? Do you know those type of songs that you sometimes find on the B-side of a record? Like 3-minute power pop songs. Like, they're never anybody's favourite song on the record. They're mainly just there to cleanse the palate or add a little bit of pace before the big finale of the album. It's like the very definition of filler. Well, this album is entirely comprised of that type of song. And to be a little bit more positive rather than dogging on absolutely everything, a couple of tracks on the A side do work. Call Out is pretty good. Sentimental at least sounds a little bit like old Feeder, so that's kind of successful. But on the B side, you have songs like Barking Dogs, Left Foot Right, City in a Rut, just really, really terrible songs. It's Renegades. Can't defend it. Feeder's worst record by a mile. So next up we have Tallulah. So Tallulah is Feeder's 10th album. At the time of recording it's also their latest record, although they are gearing up to release a new one, so there's that. Well, I hope it's better than this one at least, because this record is their 10th record. They're kind of doing a lap of honor here, playing the hits, and not exactly the hits, because this album basically takes bits and pieces from the band's last 4 albums and just kind of replicates them to diminished effect. Of all the Feeder records out there, this is the most paint by numbers, the most meat and potatoes Feeder album. Melodically, it's not that bad. Unlike the clangers on Renegades or Generation Freak Show, there's nothing particularly bad on this. Everything is just kind of alright. On the flip side, there aren't really any standout tracks, apart from the opening track, Youth, which has enough Pixie-esque oohs and ahs in the background to make it at least somewhat appealing. But yeah, aside from that song, everything is just kind of uniformly on the level of kind of okay, mediocre. Now the record is like 45 minutes or something, but by the end of the album it really starts to drag. I think maybe the lack of innovation or the constant guitar tone, which doesn't really show much variety across the record, it just starts to drag. And so yeah, this isn't a particularly strong record. Again, nothing bad on it particularly, but of all the Feeder records, this is the one that I would revisit the least. Yeah, that I'm least interested to listen to it again. I think I'd even probably rather listen to Renegades over this one, but still, this is still a better record than Renegades, because Renegades is pretty bad. Next up we have Generation Freak Show. So Generation Freak Show was Feeder's 8th album. It was the rebound record from Renegades, their worst record. And initially this is actually planned to be a double album with Renegades, but that plan fell through, and then the band decided to release it as like a 1-2 shot. So released Renegades, and then a couple months after released Generation Freak Show. But after the reception and failure of Renegades, the band mercifully decided to take a bit more time, work on the songs a little bit more. Unfortunately, that didn't particularly work out very well for them, because Generation Freak Show is all over the place. This is Feeder's most inconsistent record. The best tracks on here are actually pretty damn good, and the worst tracks are just absolutely terrible, amongst Feeder's very, very worst songs. So let's kick off with the positives. Yeah, there's some good songs on here. Borders is a really fantastic single. Could have appeared on something like Echo Park, no problem. That's a really excellent return to form for the band. Idaho is pretty damn good. Generation Freak Show with its kind of stuttering chorus, that's a really awesome song as well. And for some mad subjective reason, I've always loved In All Honesty. Technically that should be amongst the more meat and potato style Feeder tracks, because it really sounds, you know, kind of paint by numbers, but there's something about the melody, there's something about that damn chorus that just sticks in my brain, and I absolutely love that song. So yeah, those are all bonus points for Generation Freak Show. Unfortunately, the other songs like Quiet or Oh My or Children of the Sun, they just sound like bog standard Feeder, just dialed down a little bit in quality. So yeah, this is a really difficult one to rank, but ultimately I think the high points in this are a bit more worthwhile and pull me back in for more listens. I would certainly rather go back and listen to this more than Tallulah or Renegades, but yeah, inconsistent. So here it is at number 8. So next up we have Comfort in Sound. So Comfort in Sound was Feeder's 4th album, and the first one after drummer John Lee's suicide. John Lee was a childhood friend of singer-songwriter Grant Nicholas, and Grant was really broken up about the death of Lee. Rather than disappear for a while though, he decided to put all of his grief to use, go into the studio and record a new album pretty much immediately. To that end, the lyrics on this record are pretty intense and serve all of its best moments. Songs like Child in You, Quick Fade and the sublime title track Comfort in Sound are all bursting at the seams with vulnerability and grief. On a lyrical level, this is easily Feeder's most interesting album. Unfortunately, on the musical front, this album doesn't quite cut the mustard. A lot of these compositions are really half-baked. Although lyrically interesting, songs like Child in You or Quick Fade just kind of meander along without much in the way of melody. When the band do try to be heavy or catchy, it just gets even worse. The heaviness and catchiness just seems tired and half-hearted on tracks like Come Back Around and Godzilla. It's like all the energy and passion got beat out of them, which is completely understandable as it did. You know, this is a band that have absolutely had the stuffing just knocked out of them. So yeah, Comfort in Sound is a genuinely touching lyrical tribute to a lost friend, but also the sound of a band running on fumes. You just can't rush recovery, and that's exactly what this band did. They tried to rush in and recover quickly, but when your soul takes such a hard battering, you've got to take time to recharge the batteries and recover the passion. Ultimately, I think this record is more interesting than actually good. I think once the fascination of the tragic lyrics has worn off, you're left with a pretty tedious record, to be honest, and one that I don't really visit very much anymore. Coming in at number 6, we have Feeder's 5th album and also their commercial peak, Pushing the Senses. This is the moment where Feeder really broke into the mainstream and scored most of their biggest hits. On a personal level, I've always really seesawed on this record. Sometimes I feel like I really love this record, and other times I feel like I don't like it at all. So I think it's appropriate that it's kind of coming mid-table with this kind of final judgment of mine. This album is actually really consistent. I think it's one of Feeder's most consistent records on the level of songwriting. There are only 10 songs on this album, and from a songwriting perspective, I think all of them are pretty damn good. I think each of these songs has received significant attention, and I don't think they prioritized one song over another, and I don't feel that there's any filler on this record. This is literally all killer, no filler on this album. Lyrically, this is still trying to mine the same gold as Comfort and Sound, but time has gone on and we are kind of like further away from the actual tragedy, so I think the lyrics are less effective here and a bit repetitive, but still, I think lyrically there's still some really powerful moments on here, and I do like this a good bit more than Comfort and Sound. I think my favourites on the album are probably the bangers, in quotes, Pushing the Senses, Pilgrim Soul, Bitter Glass to a certain degree. Yeah, those songs are really strong and very hooky. I really love them. So what's not to like about this album if I like every song? Well, the reason that this is a very difficult record to rank is that the production here is really slick. In fact, it's just too slick. It's like Feeder were trying to get into the mainstream so hard, so focused on cracking like the very center of the zeitgeist of like radio rock with Coldplay and Travis and all that they kind of forgot their kind of identity along the way. It's like the bangers on this album, as I mentioned, like Pushing the Senses or Pilgrim Soul or Bitter Glass, they have the edges like sanded off, you know, the teeth have been filed down, so when those songs sound like they should be roaring, all they can muster is like a polite hum. And that's the problem with this record. Everything's so polite. There's nothing gritty. This is just so in the middle of the mainstream. I mean, Jesus Christ, even on Tumble and Fall, you have the singer of Travis, Fran Healy, doing the backing vocals on it. So yeah, that's why I think this record doesn't go up any further, because it doesn't feel like Feeder ultimately. It just feels like another radio rock band. And yeah, this is a good record, catchy, good songs, but you know, there's just something slightly unsatisfying about it that I can never quite put my finger on. So next up we have Silent Cry, which was Feeder's 6th record. I think this is the best of Feeder's miserablest period. You have like the trilogy of records, Comfort and Sound, Pushing the Senses, and then Silent Cry, and I think this is easily the best of those three. I think it's partially down to production and partially down to musical style. Comfort and Sound did the kind of normal grunge thing that Feeder were doing with very kind of bland production. I don't think that entirely worked, in my opinion. And then on Pushing the Senses, everything was too glossy, too poppy, and the depressing kind of music that they were trying to make didn't really fit in with that type of production style. But here on Silent Cry, I think they've absolutely nailed it. Like, they've shifted into a more post-punk kind of style of production and style of songwriting. A lot of the songs have kind of a reverb-heavy, shoegazy feel to them. And the teeth are definitely back for this one as well, because this record is pretty heavy. Songs like Who's the Enemy and Sonorous border on actual metal. I mean, when this album rocks out, I mean, it really rocks hard. Plus, there are tons of good songs on here. Opening track, We Are the People, just absolutely fantastic. I Miss You is just really, really heavy. The title track, Silent Cry and Heads Held High, have that kind of cathartic post-punk thing going on. I really like that. Fires has a really cool kind of Pixies vibe to it. Really love that one too. My favorite track on the album is actually the closing track, Sonorous, as I already mentioned. It's really heavy, has fantastic guitar breakdowns, but it also has an incredibly catchy chorus, and it's got this juxtaposition of really depressing kind of verses and this really euphoric, hopeful chorus, and that combined with the guitar breakdown is just, yeah, it's just absolutely fabulous. One of their absolute best songs. As for negative things to say about this album, I would say the songs 818 and Guided by a Voice are too similar to each other and not far enough apart on the album to warrant that kind of similarity. I often get those songs a bit confused. Both are alright. Guided Boy voice is actually pretty damn good actually, but still, they're a bit too similar to each other. There's also occasionally problems with the drumming on this, in that it occasionally slips into really kind of insipid, uninspired beats, especially on Fires. Like, I really love that song because the chorus is amazing and the atmosphere of the song is great, but the drumming, what happened on that song to the drummer? Was he asleep in the studio? Did someone bring in their 10-year-old daughter to play the drums for that one song? I don't know. But there are a few spots on this where the drumming doesn't really hold up. Nevertheless, that doesn't ruin the record, and I think this is just an excellent effort from the band. As I've already said, best of their miserablest period. Good stuff. So, after the pretty dire double bill of Renegades and Generation Freak Show, you know, I just thought Feeder were done. And I became a lapsed fan because the last thing I wanted to hear was more bog standard Feeder slowly slipping down the quality scale. So actually I hadn't heard the last two Feeder records before I came to making this list, at which point I decided to finally bite the bullet and listen to them, and I was absolutely not looking forward to it when I stuck my earphones in and started to listen to All Bright Electric, and it was just like, whoa, what the fuck is this? Where the fuck did this album come from? Because this album fucking rules. Oh yeah, All Bright Electric is absolutely fantastic. It's one of the greatest return to forms from a band I think I've ever come across. I mean, this is Feeder's 9th album, and they're absolutely knocking it out of the park on every single song after two fairly dreadful records. I mean, what the hell happened? What did they put in their cereal? Cocaine, probably. But yeah, they're really pushing the boat out here and trying lots of new things. You have a lot more acoustic instrumentation. There's a lot more attention to detail for things like atmospherics and stuff like that. A lot more synths as well. But most importantly, it's not business as usual in the melody sense. Because, you know, Feeder are a band that always kind of go where you expect them to go. You listen to a Feeder song, it does exactly what you think it's going to do. And I think that's Feeder's strength in a way. They deliver these immediate, fantastic pop songs that have hooks in them and don't do anything particularly surprising, just satisfying, you know, in a kind of like basic way. But here, that kind of goes out the window, and these songs often spring melodic surprises on you. You think that it's going to suddenly jump to this particular chord, and then boom, 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 boom. There's some kind of breakdown there that you didn't expect, and I really like that. Like, it really feels like Feeder are vital and re-energized in a melodic sense here. And Feeder have never really been innovators, so it's really lovely to hear them trying new things and also being successful at it, which I think is why I was so disappointed with the follow-up album to this, Tallulah, because that's just back to basic Feeder. And yeah, following this record, that was a huge letdown for me. But individual songs, there's nothing bad on this record, and there's plenty of really good stuff. The opening 3 songs, Universe of Life, Eskimo, Giza, just fantastic opening statement from the band. Immediately let you know that Feeder is back to full force, have a bee in their bonnet, you know, fire in their bellies. They're going for it on this one. My favorite song off the album is Infrared Ultraviolet, easily one of Feeder's best kind of rock ballads. A real badass song, that one. Absolutely love that. Oh My features like more of the acoustic instrumentation, as does the closing track, Another Day on Earth. Yeah, so just a really fantastic return to form. If you haven't heard this one, go check it out. It's amazing. Coming in third place, we have Polythene, which was Feeder's debut album. This one has a more kind of psychedelic grunge aspect to it, lots of florid guitars here, lots of different effects and stuff. The A-side on this record is just absolute perfection. That run of the first 6 songs, just chef's kiss for that, absolutely perfect. You know, you have Polythene Girl, My Perfect Day, Cement. Cement is just an absolutely fantastic Feeder song, one of their very best singles. High, their kind of signature tune, I guess. Crash, also brilliant. Radiation, adds a bit of darkness to that first half. Just absolutely stunning stuff. Plenty to look forward to on the back end as well. You have Descend, a darker, more Nirvana-esque song. That's really badass, really cool. One of the best songs too. And right at the back end you have songs like Stereo World, a lot of energy in that one, and Tangerine, absolutely hilarious. The lyrics on that, you know, Tangerine, Tangerine. And it's like, I know it's sad, life is just a piece of fruit. What? Like, I remember my brother and I, we used to crack up thinking about those lyrics. Complete nonsense, but such a lot of fun. So yeah, this is an absolutely fantastic debut album, super nostalgic for me. Negative things are pretty thin on the ground, I would say. Maybe some of the stodgier acoustic stuff on the back end of the record, songs like Suffocate and Change, those could have been cut, I think, because the record is 51 minutes long, and I think that's slightly too long, especially as by the end of the record the florid guitars, the kind of psychedelic nature of the record starts to get a little too much. But still, the minor mistakes this record makes in no way undoes all of the gargantuan good stuff that it does. So yeah, fantastic record, go check it out. In the silver medal position, we have Feeder's second album, Yesterday Went Too Soon, which is probably most hardcore Feeder's fans' favourite album. It tends to get the hardcore vote, but for me, it's second place. Why this album works so well is a bit of a mystery to me. Much like the band's worst album, Renegades, this seems to be comprised almost entirely of B-grade filler. But while Renegades was absolutely killed by that approach, here it works spectacularly. Somehow all of these B-grade songs coalesce together to make an A-grade album. The songs on here are really stripped back and basic. You really only have drums, bass, guitar and vocals on this record. And the tracks all sound like they were written and recorded in about 5 minutes. Usually that's a bad thing, but here it just sounds urgent, spontaneous and fresh. This is just a really youthful sounding album. Just 3 boys in a room caning the shit out their instruments and having fun. The record is also paced and constructed well, with a good balance between loud rockers and more introspective, quieter moments. Everything is uniformly nice on this album, so highlights are kind of difficult to pick out, but I guess I've always loved the single Insomnia and the late album Punk Attack of Hole in the Head, and also on the slower side, tracks like Tinseltown and Paper Faces are pretty impressive. Ultimately, this album succeeds in, well, as the band say themselves on this record, being a picture of perfect youth. It's just a lovely, naive, hopeful yet melancholy set of punk rock, rock and grunge. And, you know, what can you ask for? Great stuff. So here we are at the finish line. The gold medal is going to go to Feeder's third album from 2001, Echo Park. It's an absolutely fantastic record. It's kind of an amalgamation of the first 2 albums. So you have more of the kind of psychedelic florid guitars from Polythene, and you also have the more hooky straight pop of Yesterday Went Too Soon. Those 2 elements combine with a whole lot of record company clout, because there's obviously a lot of money thrown at this. The production of this is absolutely tip top. And it paid off, because this album produced a couple of really huge hits, most notably Buck Rogers, which was a top 5 single in the UK, and 7 Days in the Sun, which is one of Feeder's more memorable songs. But unlike Pushing the Senses, which had like a lot of saccharine pop sheen in a kind of negative way, here the production works in the album's favour, like pulling out the pop elements whilst also making it super heavy. I mean, some of the heaviness on this album is absolutely crushing. 7 Days in the Song is an absolute beast of a song, and the closing track Bug, really heavy stuff. It's a really dynamic and exciting album, start to finish. The songs are universally good, although when I first listened to this record, you know, when I was like in my 20s or whatever, I really didn't like Choke or Under the Weather or Tell All Your Friends. I felt those were kind of filler tracks. However, as time has gone by, nostalgia set in and I absolutely adore those tracks now. I like, the record wouldn't be that record without those songs. I absolutely love them. Highlights on this album: 7 Days in the Sun, as I've already said, awesome. Closing track Bug, fantastic. The two big kind of ballady type songs, Oxygen, Satellite News, absolutely loved those. Satellite News in particular, just absolutely loved that soaring chorus. I think there's probably a pun in there to be had. Songs like Piece by Piece and Turn kind of indicate where the band would go in the future, but still retain that kind of youthfulness. So yeah, this record is absolutely fantastic. I think it's a perfect nugget of early 2000s pop. I think it's one of the best pop records from that period of music. Just absolutely fantastic. This is a must own if you like rock, pop or grunge. Just, yeah, fantastic record. So that's my list of feeder albums, but that might not be your list. So if you disagree, please sound off in the comment section. Like, share, subscribe and all that type of YouTube jazz. Hang around to the end of the video to see my top 10 feeder songs, but most importantly, just keep on ranking.